Regarding the technical issues, you can choose the language you want by clicking on the globe icon. And we would ask you to turn off your microphones during the webinar, except for those who will take the floor, the speakers and the representatives of the governments. And if you have any question, any comment, please do write them down in the chat box. As for technical issues related as well to interpretation or any technical problem, you can as well write to us on chat box. Indeed, we have started or launched a study 3 years ago in order to see how we can include the agricultural workers in the social insurance programs. We saw that very few of them joined such schemes, especially that those agricultural workers have a big impact on food security. For agricultural workers, see that social insurance is the best way to for them to be resilient, and this is why FAO, ILO, and the IPC started a new phase of work in order to support the governments and the stakeholders to design and implement the social insurance programs in light of the administrative and the financial challenges faced by countries. This webinar will go on for 2 hours, and it will be divided between the presentation of the results of the 3 reports we have established, followed by comments by stakeholders. And then the second in the second section, we'll be presenting the comments received by countries, and we will have a Q&A session. My colleague Luca Pellerano, senior specialist of social insurance programs at the ILO, where he will be managing, he will be guiding this session and our discussions. Luca, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you very much, Dalia, for your introduction. It's a pleasure to have this big group of attendees joining the discussion today. As mentioned, I'm Luca. I'm the regional specialist on social protection for the ILO, and I have the honor to be moderating our discussion today. Dalia was mentioning the importance of the agriculture sector for well-being of societies, especially in the Arab world. We know how critical agriculture sector is in terms of employment generation, but also access to food, and how also the agriculture sector has been critical to economic transformations around the world. Changes in the world of agriculture in the agriculture sector mean a lot in terms of economic and societal transformations. But also the co-presence of different forms of employment and work arrangements in this sector. It is well known to all of us that workers in the agriculture sectors face significant work deficits when it comes to labor protection, wages, occupational safety and health, and also that in agriculture we find the worst forms of labor, such as forced labor, child labor. More importantly, in this session, we want to focus on the matter of providing access to social security and more specifically to social insurance to agriculture workers. And we have seen how throughout the COVID crisis, the importance of giving access to social security to all workers, regardless of sectors, regardless of form of employment and their families, is a key agenda for many countries in the Middle East and North Africa region. So without further ado, I would want to start the session by inviting the regional representatives from FAO and ILO to give us some opening remarks. We will start by Serge Nacuzzi, who is the deputy regional representative from the FAO, and has also previous served as a deputy regional representative for Africa, and now in the regional office for Near East and or North Africa. And we will then go to Peter Rademacher, who is the deputy regional director for the regional office for the Arab states in the ILO. They will give us a bit of an institutional framing for this session, and from then on we will move to the technical segment of the presentation. So Mr. Serge Nacuzzi, you have the floor for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Luca, and good afternoon to all. Ladies and gentlemen.
We do not hear you, Serge, so perhaps you need to turn on your microphone.
I did. Can you hear me now?
Still we cannot hear you, so maybe what we will do...
I can actually hear Serge.
I can see that perhaps in the original language. Let's see. Let me see if I can hear you now, Serge.
Hello, Luca?
Yes. So I think on the original channel we can hear him, but I couldn't hear him on the English channel. But please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much, Luca. As I said, good afternoon to all. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this important dialogue on the expansion of social insurance to agricultural workers in the Middle East and North Africa. In our region, the agriculture sector employs close to 20% of the workforce, making it a critical source of income and livelihood, especially amongst the poor and extreme poor. Whether in fisheries, forestry, livestock, or farming, we know that agriculture workers and small-scale producers are exposed to a multiplicity of economic, health, and environmental risks. Because of high levels of informality, agricultural laborers and producers often work for extended hours in unsafe and unhealthy conditions. Moreover, the prevalence of daily or seasonal work and absence of stable or formal employment relationships leaves workers vulnerable to income loss and poverty. And perhaps most importantly, those engaged in the agriculture sector are inherently dependent on the environment. This makes extreme weather events, water scarcity, pests and disease, and environmental degradation, compounded by the accelerating effects of climate change, amongst the biggest threats to those with agriculture-based livelihoods. It is also critical to keep in mind that for women, these risks are magnified and exacerbated by rampant gender-based constraints. Despite these distinct vulnerabilities, agricultural workers and small producers across the region remain excluded from statutory regimes offering protection. In other words, one of the population groups most exposed to risk is also one of the least protected by labor laws and social insurance. Past experience, like the food price hikes of 2007 and 2008, and the COVID-19 pandemic most recently, have shown that social protection and social insurance can play a key role in enabling poor rural households to recover from shocks. Also, that the sustainability of these efforts requires well-designed, gender-sensitive systems that respond to the needs of vulnerable populations. Unfortunately, the coverage, adequacy, and comprehensiveness of social protection and insurance remains remarkably low in our region, in the NENA region. Where these benefits do exist, bureaucratic obstacles often deter eligible rural households from receiving critical benefits to which they are entitled. In recent years, governments in the region have made considerable efforts to expand social protection coverage and extend contributory schemes to previously excluded segments such as those employed in the agriculture sector. And now, with the Ukraine war leading to a surge in prices of staple foods, fuel, and fertilizer, social policies remain at the top of government agendas. In this context, the analysis of how to design effective social insurance programs and overcome critical administrative and fiscal barriers is both incredibly timely and necessary. The findings that will be presented shortly are the results of numerous consultations, interviews, and hours of research done over the last year. Today, we seek your final feedback and eventual endorsement of this work as the key experts, labor representatives, and government officials in a position to advance the actions needed to ensure universal social protection. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the International Policy Center for Inclusive Growth and the International Labour Organization's Office for Arab States for their continued collaboration with FAO and for making this joint initiative possible. I would also like to thank the Inclusive Rural Transformation and Gender Equality Division at FAO headquarters for their invaluable technical support. Among us, there is a clear commitment to a rights-based social protection system that is adequate for the economic and social challenges the MENA region faces. This aspiration, embedded in the SDGs, requires continued and strengthened partnership with global, regional, national, and subnational institutions. Platforms like the Regional Issue-Based Coalition on Social Protection and the Social Protection Global Partnership for Universal Social Protection have proven to be powerful tools for advocacy and knowledge exchange on social protection and insurance. It is imperative that these are complemented by broad-based stakeholder inclusion at the local level, encompassing agriculture workers' organizations, producer organizations, women's groups, and civil society organizations. I believe today's event is an important step in this direction and a new phase of partnership focused on the practical implementation of more accessible and effective social insurance schemes for men and women dependent on agriculture. I look forward to a rich and fruitful discussion, and thank you once again for this opportunity. Over to you, Luca.
Thank you very much, Mr. Serge Nacouzi, for these opening remarks. And so let me then hand over the floor to Mr. Peter Rademacher to also offer some opening thoughts on the side of the ILO. Peter is the Deputy Regional Director for the ILO in the Regional Office for the Arab States. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Luca and Dalia for introducing us, and also Serge, thank you very much for your opening statements. A warm welcome to all participants, and especially actually to the ILO's tripartite constituents that joined us here today. Social security lies at the heart of the ILO's mandate. And over the years, the ILO has adopted many standards to guide countries to implement the right of social security as outlined in human rights instruments. Together, these provide a comprehensive framework for the rights-based approach to social security in both law and in practice. Now here in the MENA region, the population that enjoys some effective coverage of social security in one area is only 39%, whereas the global average is 47%. So clearly there's scope for great improvements. And although most countries in the region here have something in place for social insurance, their limited and unequal coverage creates further inequalities. Oftentimes, workers in the public sector generally benefit from comprehensive labor and protection, but private sector social insurance systems, oftentimes by law, exclude certain categories of workers, including those in agriculture, which we're discussing here today. Now, as Sarah has mentioned, the agriculture sector, of course, is qualified, is associated with a lot of informality. Agricultural workers typically face higher risks of poverty, malnutrition, and hunger, but also work-related injuries and accidents. They're also more exposed to natural disasters, and of course also climate change is important impact on them. Oftentimes, when experiencing such income losses, agricultural workers may resort to harmful coping strategies, such as the distressed sale of their assets, taking on predatory loans, or even engaging in child labor. Now, the COVID pandemic has put all these inequalities and gaps in social protection even in starker focus. And many countries have put in place temporary measures in terms of responding to the pandemic. What is needed, of course, are permanent solutions for social protection systems that provide universal access, including for rural populations. And the evidence suggests clearly that social protection can also help to realize other economic, social, and cultural rights, including the right to adequate food, to housing, to education and health, all of which are essential for the realization of human dignity. Now, in 2021, in this context, the Ministerial Declaration set a recent milestone on the future of social protection in the Arab region. Governments there committed to ensuring access to adequate social protection for workers in all types of employment, both formal and informal, and also to make sure that social protection systems are more inclusive and effective as enablers of national formalization strategies. In the follow-up declaration, governments, but also trade unions and employers' organizations have been discussing reformed social protection systems, including on options to extend the coverage of contributory systems to workers who have always been excluded. And of course, that includes also very much those in the agricultural sector. Our meeting today here will discuss how such social insurance schemes can address the main risks faced by agricultural workers. It will look at which schemes are best at doing so, and also the ways to overcome the obvious financial administrative limitations that such schemes may have. This together will contribute to better knowledge and also better use of these instruments, creating therefore larger impact. In closing, let me thank the International Policy Center for Inclusive Growth and also our UN sister agency, the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization, for a good collaboration to date. Thanks also to the ILO team preparing this, and we very much look forward to today's discussions to make sure together we advance on our common goal of universal access to comprehensive, adequate, and sustainable social protection. Thank you very much. Back to you, Luca.
Thank you very much, Mr. Peter Rademacher, and thank you, Serge and Peter, for framing our discussion today. You spoke to the scale of the challenge. You spoke to the importance of it in the context of international labor and social security standards and the SDGs, the importance of the topic in the current context of our region. But also you, I think, expressed very strongly the commitment through partnership in making inroads on this important agenda. So with this mandate you've given us today, let us take the agenda forward from this point. And let me remind you that we're going to have three main segments to the discussion. In the first segment, we will hear from our colleagues at the IPCIG who have led the research work that led to the preparation of three background papers that we hope can frame further conversation in the region around this topic. We will then move on to three discussants who will give us reactions, impressions, feedback on the papers and their relevance to country level debates within the region. And finally, we will have some opportunity for all of you to contribute by receiving specific inputs from government representatives, workers and employers representatives who have participated more closely to the process, but also by receiving and reacting to your comments that you will be able to make throughout the process in the chat. So please use the chat function, all of those attending this session, to ask questions, pose comments that will be captured by the organizing team and will be posed back to the IPCIG team as well as the discussants during our last session today. So without further ado, I would want to then start the first of these three segments by introducing Lucas Sato and Nurjela Mohamed, who are respectively a research assistant and a research consultant at the IPCIG. They have been our core research team on this project, and we're very grateful to them and to the whole IPCIG team for a very good collaboration on the topic. And they will introduce to us the three papers, which are really seen as a discussion opener for us today, but also for the months and years to come in the region, and where we have tried to be very concrete to break down this big challenge of extending social insurance to agricultural workers into perhaps more blocks that we can address more easily by looking at what the challenges are, but also very much what the solutions are and can be in light of international and regional good practices and experience. We will start by hearing from Lucas Sato, who will present the partnership and the objectives of the papers in general, as well as main takeaways of the first paper. And we will then move on with Nurjela, who will give us a summary of the key takeaways of the second and third paper. And the background papers are, of course, available on the web page of the event. So if you want to look through those as we have our discussion today, go and find the link. Perhaps the team can also post the link in the chat so that everybody can have access to the papers as we discuss and present them. Lucas, over to you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Luca, and thank you all for attending this webinar today. So one of our goals is to present the main results of the project, Expanding Social Insurance for Agricultural Workers in the Middle East and North Africa, Identifying Key Constraints and Discussing Policy Options, a joint project between FAO, ILO, and the IPCIG. So we divided our presentation into 6 main parts. First, we will present a brief overview of the project. Then we will introduce the 3 main reports. Next, we will present the methodology that we used, and then summarize the main findings of each report. So for the project overview, as mentioned by the previous speakers, one of the main gaps of in social protection in low and middle income countries is the limited coverage of contributory schemes among agricultural workers, especially in regions where the agricultural sector is essential for livelihood, such as for many countries in the MENA region. And MENA governments are making efforts to extend social protection to workers in the informal and the rural economy, including enhancing the access of agricultural workers to social insurance schemes. And UN agencies are supporting these efforts, and the joint project between ILO, FAO, and IPCIG is part of this support. So the 3 agencies joined forces to identify the main risks faced by agricultural workers in the region, the potential of social insurance benefits to support them cope with these risks, and to gather experiences on how countries are adapting their contributory schemes to include agricultural workers. And this project resulted in 3 research reports that are now under finalization. The first research report explores the role of social insurance schemes in addressing the risks faced by agricultural workers in MENA. The second report focuses on the financial challenges to expand social insurance for agricultural workers. And the third report analyzes administrative barriers and capacity constraints hindering the inclusion of agricultural workers in social insurance schemes. So to develop these reports, we conducted a desk review of relevant literature on the state of social insurance schemes in the MENA region and on the best practices to expand contributory schemes. We also organized 2 workshops with 43 stakeholders, including representatives of governments, authorities from national social security institutions, researchers and members of academia, and experts from UN agencies that discussed the role of social insurance schemes in addressing the risks faced by agricultural workers in the MENA region and how to address the financial and administrative barriers of social insurance schemes for agricultural workers. In addition, FAO, ILO, and the IPCIG conducted 15 semi-structured key informant interviews with agricultural workers representatives from Iraq, Algeria, Egypt, Lebanon, Sudan, Palestine, and Morocco. Now we can move to the main takeaways of our research reports. And for the first research report, the interviews and workshops that we conducted showed a great concern for agricultural workers with health risks. They are more likely to face health problems due to exposure to chemicals, toxic pesticides, and waterborne disease. And also they are usually uncovered by health insurance schemes and have less access to health facilities than their urban counterparts. And as an example of good practice, some countries are expanding their health insurance schemes and seeking for universal coverage. Egypt, for example, has committed to gradually achieving universal health coverage through a unified health insurance system financed through a mix of contributions and general revenue. The premiums paid by citizens are based on a percentage of their income, and the state treasury will be responsible to afford premiums for the most vulnerable population who cannot pay. And low-income agricultural workers is one of the groups that will be benefit from this new scheme, as it will provide the subsidized access to health for the most vulnerable. Another frequently mentioned risk was the occupational safety risks. And to mitigate these risks, besides increasing inspection and expanding the list of occupational disease to include diseases that are common to agricultural workers, countries should consider offering mandatory work injury benefits. In India, for example, India established access to social protection for workers in the construction sector and their families through worker welfare funds. These funds are financed by workers' contribution, a flat rate, and a levy of 1 to 2% of the total value of the construction project. In most states of the country, this insurance scheme guarantees access to benefits such as assistance in case of accidents and coverage of medical expenses related to illness or injuries. Interviewees also mentioned job instability and unemployment as concerning risks faced by agricultural workers, particularly wage workers in the informal sector. And the prevalence of daily work and the absence of a stable employment relationship is a major factor preventing agricultural workers from accessing social insurance. And to offer an adequate social insurance mechanism to protect these workers, it is necessary to rethink the model of unemployment benefits, considering the specificity of work arrangements in the agricultural sector, as well as the seasonality of production. Brazil, for example, offers unemployment benefits to fishers during closed seasons when fishing is forbidden during the reproduction season. The last 2 risks frequently mentioned during interviews that can be responded by social insurance instruments are age and environmental related risks. To protect people from risks related to old age, countries have been adapting national legislation to allow self-employed farmers and other categories of so far uncovered agricultural workers to contribute to the national pension scheme, and offering social pensions through non-contributory schemes for those who do not have contributory capacity as an instrument to guarantee minimum protection against poverty, offering contributory schemes as a possibility to increase pension benefits, and also considering the adaptations of old age pensions by adjusting the retirement age for agricultural workers in light of shorter careers. China, for example, adopted the new rural pension scheme in 2009. The scheme is based in two main pillars: a non-contributory basic social pension and a voluntarily funded component. The first component is available for rural people who reach 60 years old, including for those who have never made contributions, provided that their adult children were contributing to the voluntary funded component, therefore a family binding policy. And to protect agricultural workers from environmental related risks, countries can establish stronger links between social insurance and public agricultural insurance schemes for small-scale producers to compensate production losses due to environmental factors. Brazil, for example, established a subsidized contributory program that compensates family farmers for losses of productions due to droughts or floods. While Turkey established a public-private initiative to subsidize agricultural insurance schemes and expand their coverage. The first research report also discussed the trade-offs in policy design options to expand social insurance for agricultural workers, particularly the debate between integrated versus parallel schemes and mandatory versus voluntary coverage. On the first topic, literature review showed that integrated social insurance schemes present many advantages when compared to with parallel schemes, such as ensuring the solidarity aspect of the contributory schemes, facilitating labor mobility, and contributing to the financial sustainability and cross-subsidization of social insurance schemes. Regarding the trade-offs between mandatory and voluntary coverage, literature shows that mandatory contributions ensure the principle of solidarity and guarantee the protection of all workers, regardless of the costs and risks that workers may represent for the insurance scheme. However, it is necessary to ensure that schemes are affordable and have flexible contributions, as well as improve administrative and inspection capacities in remote areas. The voluntary schemes are often justified by the fact that it is challenging to enforce mandatory contributions for workers in the informal sector. However, voluntary schemes usually only draw on workers' contributions, eliminating the employer responsibility to co-finance insurance schemes, and can exclude the most marginalized workers who cannot afford social insurance schemes. And many countries are also shifting away from voluntary schemes due to the limited coverage that they have achieved. Now I will give the floor to my colleague Nurgila, who will present the main takeaways of the second and third reports. Thank you.
Thank you, Luca. Okay, so the second research report explores the main financial barriers that affect the ability of agricultural workers to participate in social insurance schemes. And also it recommends possible adaptations to mitigate these barriers and highlight some good practices. So some of the challenges were identified under this research were first, the affordability issues. which is the limited or low contributory capacities of agricultural workers to regularly pay social insurance contributions, as many of these workers receive low and seasonal wages, which in most cases could be even below the minimum wage. And maybe they receive in-kind payments. There is also the producers who are considered self-employed. They face uncertainty in their incomes, and they have to face also the double contribution challenge, in which they have to pay twice for the social insurance schemes, their contribution and their employees. The possible solution for this barrier is to first try to measure the contribution capacity of agricultural workers and procedures within the specific country, and based on that, set adequate contribution rates for this category, like Zambia and Colombia did, and consider different approaches to subsidize the contribution, targeting the most vulnerable producers and agricultural workers. In 2019, Egypt thought of similar approach. When the country decided to extend the coverage of social insurance schemes to including former agricultural workers, they set a protocol that stipulated that the government would support informal workers by subsidizing their contributions to social insurance schemes by paying what is equivalent to employer's share, which is 12% of the minimum income. And then there is the major challenge that agricultural workers face, and producers as well, is irregular income. And that is due to several factors, such as the seasonality of production, interruption of agricultural employment, and also the career risks. It can be overcome by allowing flexible contributions. For example, making the payment for social insurance providers during the harvesting periods, or deducting the contributions from the selling of agricultural products. This can help overcome the requirement of social insurance schemes for regularly monthly contributions. For example, Argentina allowed flexible contributions by replacing regular monthly contributions with a substitutive tax that is deducted from the producer's sales. What is interesting about this example is that it also provides an incentive for employers, because these contributions are only deducted at stage of production process when their income is actually at highest. This is taking us to the third barrier from the employer's perspective, because it might be challenging to enforce them to pay contributions for their temporary and seasonal hired workers, especially in light of the limited financial capacity these employers might face. Some solutions for such a challenge is to try to cover seasonal and temporary agricultural workers by adopting an approach of contributions based on criteria like the size of land or number of employees, like in Lebanon on the agricultural value chain, like India. In Lebanon, for example, a proposed new law that aims to expand social insurance for agricultural workers, it is still now under discussion, but it suggests a criterion-based contribution to finance social insurance schemes, focusing on the size of the land and the sales of production. Lastly, there is the lack of financial literacy and financial inclusion barrier, as many countries in MENA region have low financial literacy rates, and rural population usually have limited access to financial inclusion and lack of knowledge about the importance of social insurance schemes. So this is really relevant. This can be overcome by conducting awareness raising campaigns and promote financial inclusion to increase agricultural workers' knowledge about the importance of social insurance schemes, and to enhance their trust in the system and increase their willingness to contribute to these schemes. These campaigns and financial service should be specially designed to the needs of rural families. For example, Jordan in 2015 had launched a program that's called the National Financial and Social Education Program, and it aimed at promoting financial inclusion and awareness, capacitating beneficiaries with money management, savings, and other basic financial tools. Now moving to the third report of this series, it mainly discussed the administrative constraints that affect the inclusion of agricultural workers in social insurance schemes. It also suggests possible solutions to overcome these barriers, just like the other two research reports, and also to expand the coverage of social insurance schemes to reach rural and usually hard to reach areas. The first administrative barrier identified during the research is the complexity of administrative procedures. The prolonged procedures that social insurance providers sometimes put in place to enroll and receive social insurance benefits, including the long queues, the documentation required, can all impose barriers for agricultural workers because it can be translated as an extra wasted time and additional opportunity costs. So the possible solution for this barrier is for social insurance providers to simplify the procedures and requirements and adapt administrative processes to the specific needs of agricultural workers, including by reducing the number of need-supported documents, for example. Some countries also used innovative instruments, such as using the technology and mobile money, like Kenya that introduced the M-Pesa mobile application. And some countries even combine the social insurance contributions with other government fees or tasks, such as the monotax regime in Uruguay. The second barrier in this research report is the remoteness and lack of infrastructure, especially in rural areas. So the distance between agricultural workers living in rural zones and social insurance providers, as well as the difficult transportation, had all led to the exclusion of agricultural workers. So this can be overcome if social insurance providers worked on increasing their presence on ground, even if not branches, maybe just establish one-stop shops or even mobile one-stop shops. In Algeria, for example, the Algerian National Social Insurance Fund for non-employees has established a total number of 48 counters in each wilaya, each one consisting of the logistical and humanitarian resource needed to serve the insured people in that wilaya, and to reduce the cost and time for the people who are residing very far to travel. In case social insurance providers have limited administrative and financial capacities to adapt such strategies, then it is recommended to try to leverage existing networks and institutions at rural level, which can help reach people living in those areas at a minimum cost. Then there is the lack of awareness and needed information about rights of social protection and social insurance benefits in general, especially in some rural contexts and informal sector where levels of education are low and there is a high poverty context and high opportunity cost to get accurate information. To overcome this, it is suggested to improve communication between social insurance providers and employers and agricultural workers to ensure that the latter are aware of their responsibilities and entitlements through using a mix of media channels, for example, to ensure reaching rural households and those in informal sector. It should be accompanied with targeted education programs to this category. There is also possibility of disseminating information through local leaders to minimize the cost, maybe arranging mobile convoys to reach those very far or locating in very far areas, opening service centers in strategic spots in the rural areas. All these can be possible solutions for this. So, for example, the communication strategy that has been used by the government of Cape Verde to reach independent workers consisted of 3 stages. One, they had communication campaigns through traditional media channels, and then there is establishing alliances with existing independent worker organizations, like establishing workshops with them, and opening service centers in rural areas near to independent workers. Next, we have the barrier related to inspection and enforcement challenge. The lack of qualified social insurance inspectors and the wide use of non-written labor contracts in the sector create disincentives for agricultural workers and producers to contribute to social insurance schemes. As a possible solution, social insurance providers might need to improve inspection and enforcement of labor law and social insurance contributions as for agricultural workers through maybe initiatives such as strengthening the inspection system by increasing human and material capital of social insurance provider, maybe linking a social insurance registration with administrative license. For example, Jordan Social Security Corporation, SSC, has recently applied the mandatory inclusion of all drivers of public transportation under its umbrella. So to enforce this decision, the SSC linked the renewal of the driver's identity cards with the SSC registration. Next, there is the lack of representation of an organization of agricultural workers. This leaves them more vulnerable and marginalized and reduce their chances of being well represented in policy dialogues. So to overcome this barrier, it is recommended to promote the organization of agricultural workers in associations, cooperatives, and unions, and strengthen these organizations to be able to facilitate the registration to social insurance schemes for its members, in addition to increase their awareness about their rights, of course. Lastly, there is the lack of digitalization in social insurance schemes in the MENA region, which makes administrative processes more time-consuming for social insurance providers, agricultural workers, and employers, which affect the system efficiency as a whole. To solve this, the research report is suggesting to consider seriously establishing online platforms to facilitate the agricultural workers' applications to social insurance schemes, the payment of contributions. It would ensure quick access to accurate information and increase coverage of social insurance schemes ultimately. The digital solution should be used in tandem with campaigns to increase the literacy of agricultural workers in addition to in-kind distribution of digital tools, and to make sure that rural population are aware how to use these digital tools, and also the expansion of internet coverage for remote areas in countries there is an issue in the internet and electricity coverage. There is an interesting example from the region, actually many countries in the region. There is Jordan and its online platform for self-employed workers to register and pay social insurance contributions. There is the farmers registry in Lebanon, and there is Algeria has the Mancom electronic service for non-employees. And then in Tunisia, there is Ahmini application for women in the farming sector. With that, I conclude our presentation and thank you all for listening. And just as a small correction, the reports are not currently available, but will be very soon. And over to you, Luca.
Yes, thank you very much, Lucas and Nurjela, for giving us this overview of the very rich work that has taken place in the past few weeks to document and bring to you this analysis of barriers, solutions, and good practices. As Nurjela mentioned, the papers will be made available to all of you very soon, but we want to take this opportunity today to get your input so that we can make sure that those papers reflect your views as to what we may be missing, what you consider important when it comes to this agenda of extending access to social insurance to all workers in agriculture. We have more than 90 people online today from across the region, so let's make the most of this opportunity to share ideas, to contribute and input. And you have two ways of doing it. Either you want to type your question, comment, or input in the chat, or you can see at the bottom there is also a Q&A function where you can record your comment, your contribution, and this will be addressed to the panelists or reflected in the last segment of our conversation. For the moment, we will hear some reactions from three distinguished speakers to whom we have asked to read, engage in more detail with the draft papers and to provide their reaction, their feedback, their observations in relation to the extent to which these papers and the proposals they bring forward speak to the specific national agendas and country context in which each of them is engaged. So we will start by Muyad Bisharat, who is a director of the Lobbying and Advocacy Department at the Union of Agricultural Work Committees for the State of Palestine. And Muyad will give us his impressions on the first report of the series, which looks at how to make social insurance schemes better address the risks, better fit the needs of agricultural workers in the MENA region. We will then move on to Ms. Mirvat Sabrin, and we will finally close this panel by hearing from Ms. Nejla Hayouni. So first to you, Muyad, what did you make of the first paper, and how do you think is relevant for Palestine and for the region?
First of all, I would like to thank you for this opportunity to speak in this event, to speak about social security, security schemes for workers in the agricultural centers. So this paper was really rich. It tackled many important aspects that we can build on, be it in Palestine or in the region as a whole, in the Arab region and the MENA region as well. I will be speaking shortly about the main points that I found interesting in this report. Of course, this report, the first report entitled the role of the social security schemes in MENA region, and this report shed the light on the risks that agricultural workers face in the MENA region. And it is clear that there are 5 main risks, mainly risks relevant to health, impediments to provide healthcare, risks relevant to occupational safety and health, and work injuries, risks about unemployment, and risks relevant to age, and others relevant to the environment where workers work. Workers in agriculture that represent 17.5% of the labor force in the Arab region. This is according to the data of 2019. And also ILO shows that more than 90% of agricultural workers in the low and middle income countries work in informal sector, and most of the time they do not benefit from social security schemes, pension, maternity, old age, and other benefits. And also the report shed the light on the main factors that lead to the exclusion of the rural areas from social security benefits, mainly due to the inequality between urban and rural areas. And also there are some gaps relevant to infrastructure, transportation, women, and also not equipping the places with access to this to the people with disabilities. And also we have found, or the report have found, that there are no sufficient equipment to protect the agricultural workers from chemicals and pesticides and so on. And the females are the most affected by this inequality, and there's lack of transportation to rural areas. And this is what the report has mentioned, mainly in Tunisia and Morocco. As to the OPT, the report has mentioned that the agricultural workers in OPT in the West Bank that 85% of workers are subject to different risks due to the environment they work on. 62% work for more than 8 hours per day, and 80% do not get any compensation due to work injuries. In addition to that, as the report has mentioned, the migrant workers and the displaced are subject to unsafe work circumstances, and the report has mentioned about the Syrian workers in Jordan. Also, the report has talked about the main amendments that can be made to the social protection and security schemes, and in this way we can face the risks that agricultural workers face, mainly health security and work injury, pension, old age, also pensions, and agricultural insurance. As to the health insurance in Tunisia, this is a pioneering experience. Tunisia could cover 64% of its inhabitants, and Morocco and Egypt are trying also to have an inclusive social insurance for its workers. As to work injuries, the report has mentioned that most of agricultural workers do not get work injury compensation in our region. As to unemployment subsidies, of course, those are kind of lacking in our region. And before COVID-19, it was less than 10% in the MENA region compared to 18.6% in all countries around the world. Thus, this unemployment insurance is not easy. Also, the report has mentioned in its conclusion that there are different forms of schemes. It compared between the integral and the parallel, and Lucas has mentioned that, and also there are the mandatory and the voluntary schemes. If the schemes were this or that, of course, agricultural workers have to be included, but while providing different benefits according to their special needs and their capacity to contribute. And there's a scheme that is adopted in Tunisia, and there are certain procedures that were followed in Egypt, and this is a proof that something can be made in the region. In the current region, the mandatory here or the voluntary schemes represent only 10% or cover 10% of the eligible people, and thus they are not very much adopted in the area. Mr. Lucas have talked in details about the different risks and how the response can be made. But regarding the Palestinian case in particular or situation, there are some recommendations that here are common between the results of the report and the study that we made in 2021. I will mention some. First of all, renew the supervision and supervision from some ministries, such as the use of pesticides, chemicals, and look for more safe alternatives for the health of the farmers and the environment. Have some penalties and specify the working hours for women in particular, and establish a special court for work conflicts. Include agricultural workers in the labor law, similar to other workers, and have a special item for them or have a special law for them, establishing equal employment laws and not to be discriminatory in employment. The Ministry of Labor in Palestine has to have a modern social security scheme or a law and include all the relevant entities, and it should be also parallel to international standards. There should be international labor contracts for agricultural workers, also according to international standards. And just as a conclusion, I can say that it is possible to achieve good social security for workers, agricultural workers, be it in the formal or informal sector, and make those schemes more inclusive through benefiting from local, regional, and international experiences, as is the case in Tunisia, Egypt, Turkey, Brazil. Thank you for the efforts deployed in this regard and for providing us with this opportunity to take part in this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mouyad, and also I want to thank the interpreters who are doing an excellent job keeping up with the fast pace of the interventions. I think we did follow very well also on the English channel, so that's much appreciated to the interpreters. Thanks for your work. Maybe inviting the next speakers to keep the pace reasonable so interpreters can manage. But thanks very much for these perspectives on the first paper, but also on an agenda more specifically to Palestine, and much appreciated your final words saying that it is possible. It is possible to make progress. We know countries in the region have made progress, so that's exactly the reason of coming together, to perhaps take inspiration and also motivation from other countries who have made inroads on this front. And we will now hear from Ms. Mervin Sabrin, who is the Assistant Minister of Social Solidarity for Protection and Safety Networks at the Ministry of Social Solidarity of the Arab Republic of Egypt. We will hear how the second paper that looks more at issues of financing social insurance for agricultural workers is relevant to the context of Egypt and what Egypt has achieved on this front. So over to you, Ms. Mervat, and I will invite the next two speakers to try and stick to the time, about 10 minutes, because we are running a little bit behind with the schedule. Over.
Thank you, Luca. It is given me a great pleasure to participate today in this special webinar on expanded social insurance for agricultural workers in MENA region, organized by IBC, IG, and FAO and ILO. Given the importance of the role of social protection in reducing gender social inequality and rural poverty and accelerating the achievement of sustainable development goals, which will not achieved without the holistic integration of economic and social dimensions. The research report of financing social insurance schemes for agriculture workers discussed a number of solutions to the challenge related to extend the social protection to agriculture workers. And I have some comments in this regard. First, expand health insurance coverage financing through a mix of contribution and taxes to cover health risks faced agriculture workers. There is still a challenge faced the government here, especially in Egypt, which is the large size of informal sector and no comprehensive database about it. And we couldn't reach them. So it is recommended that the government put a plan to register the informal sector. Participation in the social insurance system will deprive agriculture workers from getting the social assistance. It is recommended that the government continues the eligibility of social assistance for agriculture workers during the time of crisis and emergency, and should establish emergency fund for agriculture workers to compensate them during stop of the income or crisis or endemics like Corona. Also, the higher of the normal retirement is a negative incentive for agriculture to participate in the social insurance system. So it is recommended that the government develop insurance schemes that allow to retirement at different ages. Also, the low contributory capacity. Also, the fact that it is difficult to agriculture workers to pay insurance contribution due to their low income makes sense. Workers that aren't under the umbrella of social protection might have to pay extra expenses like health care, emergency response, higher cost of finance, etc. That might exceed the insurance contribution amount. It is recommended that the government develop social insurance scheme that fit different income levels, where agriculture and other low-income irregular workers could pay contributions that match their financial liabilities. Irregular income, as organized labor, mostly work in seasonal and temporary jobs that don't provide fixed income. We recommended to incorporate flexible payment options for social insurance contribution. However, the challenge would be mostly around the means used on the both calculating and collecting contribution. Also, the mandatory social insurance system here in Egypt for agriculture, the coverage rate for the agriculture workers is only around 10% from the labor force. It is crucial to kick off a national-wide media campaign to increase the awareness about the benefit can get from registering in the social insurance system. Challenge of enforcing employer contributions. Social insurance inspectors shall conduct periodical field visit and check on the employer to make sure that they comply with the legislation, the regulation of social insurance for irregular workers. If we talk about the lack of awareness or financial literacy and financial inclusion, I believe that the financial inclusion is not the major issue at the moment due to the availability of the wide range of financial services that fits the needs of everyone. However, the more important step now is to increase the financial literacy. Most Ministry of Social Solidarity here in Egypt conducted a study in 2022 regarding the main reason of why agriculture workers don't participate in the social insurance system, as the coverage rate of agriculture under social insurance system is around 21% of labor force. If we talk about the estimation of the agriculture workers here in Egypt, we talk about around 10 million. And this study resulting in the long and the complexity of procedures and the lack of simplified source of information to explain the advantage of participating to social insurance. One of the reasons, the high cost of the monthly contribution to the monthly income is barely enough for living expenses, the absence of non-written contract between the worker and the employer, which cause a high cost for workers' contribution themselves. The contribution rate here for self-employed is, we talk about 21% of the total income. Irregular of worker or stability of income and diversification of its economic tasks, which couldn't commitment to pay contribution on monthly basis, low trust of the worker in the social insurance system. This is the main reason why they do not participate in social insurance system. To overcome the aforementioned in financial barriers, Egypt launched in the beginning of 2022 a complementary social insurance scheme for agricultural workers with a public insurance company, not with the Ministry of Manpower, as the report said. The target of the new scheme is to adapt the contribution system meets their specific needs, included by making contribution and the retirement age more flexible. The program called Your Pension in Your Hands, which allowed to agricultural worker to determine the amount of the contribution and when he could pay their contribution and when to register in the system or participate. And also when they could retirement. Under this scheme, the insurance premium can be determined every month or every semester or every year as worker wish. Adding the flexibility to the contribution system, farmer would be entitled to receive disability, old age, and death and insurance benefit. Thank you all and for listening. Thank you, Luca.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mervat. I think this has been a very, I think, impressive presentation of the importance to look at these different barriers together, not only the financial barriers, but the administration, the access, the outreach, and also the awareness barrier. And also, sharing with us good progress that has been made on this front in Egypt with a lot of innovation and also the recognition of the need to combine financing from social contributions and taxes to actually achieve full coverage of that 10 million of workers that you have referred to in your presentation. So we'll keep hearing from Egypt for sure, as hopefully this conversation continues across the region as to how collectively inroads can be made on this important agenda. So the last but not least discussant is Ms. Nejia Ayouni, who is the Deputy Director of Planning at the Ministry of Agriculture, Water Resources and Fisheries of the Republic of Tunisia. So we have heard from one Ministry of Social Solidarity, responsible for social insurance. Now we hear from the other side of the spectrum of the policy, responsibility from the perspective of a Ministry of Agriculture. What did you take from the third paper on barriers, administration barriers and capacity constraints, and how are those relevant to the ongoing debate in Tunisia? Over to you, Nejia.
I would like to thank you all and to congratulate the research team for the comprehensiveness of the study. I'd like to thank you all for the efforts you have deployed, and allow me to submit some comments. The report gave a very clear and a parallel diagnosis of the rural communities and the barriers that hinder the inclusion of agricultural workers and small-scale producers in the social insurance schemes, while confirming that women are most affected because of their balance. The report tackled the administrative barriers and the absence of the necessary infrastructure In addition to the lack of knowledge and the lower capacities of control and the inspection and the absence of organizational framework and the absence of or weak digitization. I used to divide the administrative barrier. I would divide or classify the barriers into into 3 categories and not into 6. The first related to the limited availability of insurance programs. The second is about the barriers that hinder the access to social insurance programs, affordability barriers, and the third category is more a horizontal aspect that hinder the inclusiveness of agricultural laws. And the first category related to the limitations of the system. We can talk as well about the weak financial resource and the red tape that hinder communication and knowledge exchange, in addition to the absence or a weakness of a digitization, which would not allow for a good accountability and would lead to the non-participation in a social insurance program. The second category about access barriers would encompass the illiteracy in generally speaking, especially illiteracy that poses a big challenge here because digitization is opening new horizons in terms of information and marketing, and it could be a very important source of income for small scale producers and agricultural workers. There are as well some cultural barriers or moral barriers which tackle very clearly, especially in our societies that has each its specificities, its own beliefs, in addition to the discrimination against women, as if women are doomed to not to participate workforce, and especially that we find a big number of women that die during road accidents during their moving from one work to another. In the mentality of agricultural workers, for example, there is no concept, there is no notion of pension for those agricultural workers. They do not even think a pension or about retiring, and there is a lot at this level. There are as well barriers related to small-scale producers and agricultural workers related to them being scarce. The absence of a framework that could regulate and organize them. This framework is totally absent, and if it exists, it does not play an important role. we have to talk about the political environment in our countries. We have a lack of agricultural, especially with the surge of prices that affect the income and the work of agricultural workers. And this does not allow the farmers to any social insurance programs. We need as well to diversify sources of income, especially in the rural areas and where the cost of electricity, of water are very high. We need to find to support the agricultural workers, and this is not clear in the report. All these issues could have been compiled and mentioned in the report because it is very important for economic policies. As for the solutions proposed, the study mentioned the absence of one-size-fits-all solutions. And indeed, we cannot have magical solutions that could be adapted to all populations, to all countries. This is why we should establish a list for the many problems that the countries are facing in order to overcome the administrative barriers. And we need or indeed as well to understand the context, because each reform has its own background, its own context, and this is very important in order for the countries to take out lessons from all the experiences. Of course, the report could not have delved into all these issues, into all these problems, but it could have given some information about all the aspects I am mentioning. Digitization is now well disseminated and can bring many benefits because solutions related, for example, to support resources or mobile units are expensive solutions, and maybe they are not very feasible. But the remoteness of centers is not the main reason or an important reason for not joining social insurance programs. This is why each solution could have been given maybe a score with regards to its priority. And it is recommended to have solutions that would not be expensive, especially for low-income countries, in order for those countries to be able to take the necessary reforms. We have as well to call upon the civil society organizations that are supporting the migrant workers and the agricultural. So we can allow the CSOs as well to involved in this process. I wish that report could compile the scientific experiences in this regard, especially to economic and social policies for the stakeholders to benefit from all the experiences and the reforms being undertaken. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this perspective, Ms. Ayuni. Thank you for helping us frame the conversation within the broader context of what the agriculture sector represents for economies in our region, but also for noting on the importance to find solutions for the administration that are prioritized and that are also costed, because we need to be aware of the capacity constraints that social insurance systems face across the region and use resources perhaps more intelligently to make inroads. For example, many of us have discussed the importance of enhancing inspection in the social insurance field, but we all know how limited capacity there is for those services in most social insurance institutions across the region. And also thanks for reminding us that challenges to extending social protection to agriculture workers are further heightened by the fact that many agriculture workers in some countries in the region are also migrant workers. So they face the double barrier of working in a sector where access is limited and also being excluded either by law or in practice because of the barriers that exist specifically with access for migrant workers in some countries across our region. It's been really wonderful to hear from the three speakers, and I want to thank them wholeheartedly for their perspectives and inputs, diverse but very complementary. So now we move to the last segment of our meeting today, which is more to hear back from you, to hear your views and your perspectives. And we will do it first by asking our colleague Dalia from FAO to give us a summary of written feedback that we have received from some of you. So in the past few weeks, we have engaged governments across the region, both ministries of labor and of agriculture and social protection, labor and social protection and agriculture, to tell us what they felt the papers brought to the table and what are their priorities with reform on these agendas. So Dalia will give us a brief overview of what we've heard, and then we will open the floor for contributions by government representatives and trade union representatives who want to take the floor. In the meantime, please continue to use the Q&A function on the bottom of the screen to share your questions, your comments, your observations, so we can also make sure those are reflected in the last segment of our discussion. We have about another half hour to go, and I think we are on time. So let's take the next 30 minutes to wrap up our conversations by hearing more from you and perhaps reflecting also on some of the next steps. Dalia, over to you.
Thank you, Luca. I'd like to thank the countries who have sent their comments. On the table, you are seeing now there is the summary of 4 countries with regards to the challenge implementing the social insurance programs that would encompass the agricultural workers. We will start with Morocco, which is considered as an country in terms of social insurance programs. They have mentioned difficulty of coordination between ministries, as well as the difficulty of designating the beneficiaries and the contributions. They have mentioned as well the challenges in terms of the implementations related to the specificities of the agricultural sector, like the seasonality of work, the climate change, and the agricultural work being undertaken in addition to other professions. Yemen indicated as well the challenges like the absence of flexibility in paying the contributions, the high levels of poverty and unemployment, and the informal work because of the work of the war and of the deterioration of agricultural productivity, in addition to the non-implementation of the health insurance law. And they have indicated the absence of awareness regarding the benefits of social insurance programs. The UAE have indicated that the high percentage of foreign workers who are excluded from the pension schemes because they do not receive an end of service indemnity or any health insurance. Palestine indicated the low number of households depending on agriculture because of the occupation, as well the inability of agricultural workers to pay their contributions. They indicated also the absence of skilled workers in the agricultural sectors and the higher percentage of informal workers. And the representatives of Palestine as well mentioned that the family workers do not commit to the standards of occupation and health safety, and could as well resort to child labor. And they have mentioned the non-existence of social insurance. Here, this table summarizes the ongoing efforts to expand the...
In Morocco, the compulsory insurance have been launched in 2021, and there's a pension for farmers, and the Ministry of Farming is in charge of identifying the compensations and also choosing who to subsidize, and 5 categories have been subsidized, and more than 1 million people were included in the Social Security Fund. In addition to that, a national farming registry will be established in order to collect the data in order to enhance the activation of this sector. In Yemen, the situation is complicated, and in 2013, a new law was issued in order to establish here optional social security law or a scheme for those who are not included in the law, and this includes the agricultural workers and fishermen. In UAE, there's a draft law in order to provide insurance again for the unemployed, for the residents, and the of course, the nationals. And in Palestine, there's a draft law in order to cover or to provide a full coverage, social protection and social security, and also there's an amendment to the labor law in order to increase agricultural workers. This is a suggestion, and there's a fund specific for the victims of natural disasters, and also it provides this insurance. This is just a summary. It does not include all the details, but representatives of ministries and the candidates can, of course, add any detail if there are any. The last slide here summarizes the questionnaire that we got here, and there are some remarks from the Arab Union for Trade Unions as to the challenges. There are certain limitations on the union rights and the right to establish a unions, and this will lead to less contributions. There are also laws that labor laws that do not include agriculture and which does not focus a lot on the occupational safety and health in agriculture, and does not focus a lot on inspection. Also, there's a minimum wage in the minimum wage in the agricultural sector is less than it is in other sectors, or it does not exist sometimes. And finally, there's no real social contribution in the designing and establishment of social security schemes. As to the recommendations, the use of or the participation of unions in here circulating the social security schemes and raising awareness about the importance of social security, enhancing social dialogue about contribution and the responsibility of employers, and mitigating the administrative impediments, the use of media in order to raise awareness about the importance of social insurance and security for the workers in the agricultural sector, and also provide digital services and making internet available, and using simple Arabic language. Thank you for your kind listening, and now we will open the floor for discussion. Please write any question or comment you have in the chat box or the Q&A, and ask for intervention. And of course, only the representatives of ministries and those with them can ask to take the floor. Thank you, Luca.
Thank you. So indeed, as Dalia, thank you, Dalia, for this summary, and thank you to all partners who contributed with their inputs to the questions prior to the webinar. It will help us improve and refine the 3 research papers that we have presented to you today. Some of you, the government representatives and the workers, have been given, you can see a microphone has been activated for you to make an input now. So I can see that there is already a couple of hands up. So I will take quick interventions from each of you. Please try and keep it short so we can hear from a broader variety of perspectives. And we would start by Demiha Alobidi, who I understand is talking from Iraq. Over to you.
Hello, everyone. Demiha Alobidi. I'm from the Social Security Fund. Thank you all for having us. I can say that regarding the main challenges that face the expansion of social insurance for agricultural workers is that the current labor law did not include those workers, and the workers cannot access this sector, and it is hard for inspectors to identify the monthly salary of the workers, because agricultural workers or agricultural work is based on different issues, the weather, the season, and so on. Many countries depend on agriculture, but of course it is also an oil country. So we are happy that you have raised this point. There are many impediments and barriers that we might face. As I have mentioned in the beginning, inability to include agricultural workers because there is no law that stipulates including this category, and the inability to identify the minimum wage that the worker gets, so that we can calculate the contribution at the social security at this basis. So this category has to be included in a union, syndicate, or any organizational entity, so that we can refer to that entity, we can negotiate with them, we can get the names of the workers in this sector, and this way we can move forward. Furthermore, we need a law. The agricultural sector should be regulated in a law. So in the new draft law, as you know, or maybe some of you do not know, that we are currently issuing a new law, and in the new draft law we have the optional or voluntary here security and insurance, and this will enable the workers to be included. Currently there are no legislations that allow the inclusion of those categories, and there are no relevant committees in order to follow up those aspects. This webinar was very beneficial. We have taken note of many things, and we will provide you with that later on. In the new draft law, there is the new voluntary law, which includes the voluntary inclusion of the workers. But I hope that there will be a specific law for agricultural workers or farmers and special syndicate, maybe, or trade union, so that we can refer to, talk to when the law is put in practice. Thank you.
Thank you for this contribution. And to bring us back to the plans in Iraq to develop new legislation on social security, to build a system that can be inclusive of all workers, including agricultural workers. Interesting to see you're taking that perspective of inclusion on a voluntary basis, but aiming to build on that in the future. I saw there were two other hands. So we have first the hand from Mr. Castro from Lebanon, and I think now we're going to open the floor for any other contribution that participants would want to make. So we'll hear briefly from Mr. Castro, and then we go to Fauzia Ben Salah. So first to you, Mr. Castro.
Thank you, Mr. Luca. Thank you for inviting us. We in Lebanon have a problem because in Lebanon, in the labor law, the agricultural workers have been excluded from Social Security. And we also have a problem in the agricultural sector because it is a sector where part of it is family run, and we do not have a kind of an agricultural calendar, if we might call it, because we are in the Middle East, and this isn't the case of tobacco, for instance, and so on. And Luca knows about that because we've worked about this, about amending the labor law, about Social Security. So he knows that there are efforts deployed in order to include agricultural workers and other categories that the labor law has excluded, such as fishermen, municipality workers, domestic workers, and many others. But I believe that, unfortunately, the Lebanese government is not deploying any effort in this regard, because agriculture is neglected anyway and is excluded from any kind of subsidy and support in Lebanon. Even we find that we do not have any education or agricultural education. We do not have any agricultural orientation in education. There are some who study in agriculture, or but they travel elsewhere in order to work in this field. We need a lot to be done in this domain. So we have here we don't have a lot of seasons, unfortunately, because this sector is neglected, as I said, but we have a diversity of products. And so our brothers and sisters in the Arab region are, of course, very active in this domain. Lebanon is a small country. It has diversified products, but the quantities are limited. So I hope that ILO maybe has, or FAO has those agricultural programs, and we at FENASOL, we are doing national effort in order to support agricultural workers and mainly farmers of tobacco in Lebanon. We are trying to organize them within committees Sorry, his sound is breaking. I cannot hear him always clearly. So we believe that this area is a wide one in Lebanon, and we should work on that. Unfortunately, the labor force, the migrant labor force is very much exploited, especially the Syrian workers and the workers from other nationalities. So they are exploited in the agriculture sector. And also we have a child here exploitation. We have child labor in the agriculture sector, and also we suffer in the agricultural sector a lot at the level of pesticides, fertilizers. We have also harmful, sometimes reptiles such as snakes and others. So we have sometimes workers, mainly women and children, who are risking their lives in order to be working in the field. So I just wanted to touch upon that, that we need capacity building in Lebanon here more in order to deal with agricultural workers and agriculture sector in general. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Castro. And I think thanks for also pointing this note on the need to look at issues of social protection and labor protection hand in hand. Of course, the exclusion of agricultural workers or the majority of agricultural workers from labor laws in several countries in the region is a major hindrance to their participation in social security, and therefore should be a matter of concern and work across the region, but also to note that progress can be made even under the existing legislative frameworks to make progressive steps in that direction. I'd seen that there was a hand up before by Fawzia Ben Salah, so I will give her the floor, and then we'll also give the floor next, I think, to Ayman from Lebanon. Over to you, Fawzia.
Thank you, Fawzia Ben Saleh from the Center of Social Research and Studies in Tunisia. I would like to speak about the Tunisian experience. So when it comes to expanding social insurance in agriculture or farming, and it is a really pioneering one. But first of all, I would like to clarify some concepts. When we talk about expansion of social insurance, as it is mentioned in the ILO recommendation 202, here we are talking about not social security, but about social protection, be it in schemes that are financed by the contributions or by programs that are financed by the government, which provide protection to all people, no matter what their age is, children, women, elderly. And this is financed by the government's treasury or budget, because the two will have an impact on the results of the study and the results of the possible reforms. There's another point when we talked about coverage for all agricultural workers, this recommendation, regardless of the sector or the type of work. I would like here to note that the Tunisian experience is special in this case because it provides the legal coverage, and this includes all workers in the agricultural sector. And there's a law for all workers in this sector, no matter what type of work he or she does and no matter what his wage is. However, the legal coverage did not enable the Tunisian government to provide the real or actual coverage that has remained very minimal. So the different schemes in the agricultural sector have led to weak actual coverage, and thus studies in this domain are diversified, especially at the center I work at since 1998 and 2000. There are studies since then about the possibility of finding a suitable scheme for a category of agricultural workers who do not fulfill the formal sector economy. Here, we're not talking about administrative impediments only or financing, but the Tunisian experience have proven that expansion of a legal coverage is based on a main principle, which is the classic approach, which would make a foundation for the social security. And here we're talking about an organized, well-studied organization that has its own accounting and structure. And here we're talking about the structure, accountability, and about administrative also capacities to register workers and provide benefits. However, this approach have had certain disadvantages, especially to many workers in the vulnerable sector and those on the move. And this was different from one employer to another, from one sector to another. And this, of course, did not do those studies good. And in the recommendation about integral and unified social security to all workers in the agricultural sector and the structure she means formal or informal agricultural sector, it guarantees the equality between workers. However, it here causes the problem of discrimination between formal and informal sectors. That's why some studies have suggested having a scheme that includes the vulnerable sector and those on the move, the workers on the move. And this is on one hand.
Thank you.
I would like here to say that as to the occupational safety and health, we are talking about work diseases and work injuries. And this is a separate part from Social Security, and going into that or enrolling in that is separate. And here I wanted just to explain that. As to financing is a problem when it comes to the expansion of social insurance for agricultural workers, given that Social Security has benefits, and this is tightly linked to the equality in the resources to the benefits, and also there should be financing to this category. But this category,
I don't want to cut you short, but we want to leave time also for other speakers. So maybe you want to conclude your point, and we'll give the floor to other speakers, because we only have a few minutes left before we finish the session. Thank you.
I wanted to conclude and say that financing is one of the problems faced in this suggested scheme for this category. And also there are some remarks about the limitations and administrative constraints, or the most important of which is what I talked about in the beginning, legal laws or the laws in labor laws, she means, in Tunisia exclude the workers, and most of them were based on the idea that there is an organized institution, and this we cannot adopt when it comes to the vulnerable workers or to family businesses that are very present in the agricultural sector. I will send you the remaining comments and remarks later on. Sorry for taking too much time.
Thank you very much. And these are very well taken points, very important. We look forward to receiving them and to use them in the final round of preparation of the papers. I think we still had one hand up, and then we can ask the panelists to respond to some of the questions we've received and come to a close. There was a hand by Ayman Madani, so if you want to come in now, but I would really request that you keep it to a 1 minute intervention on the key points you want to make. Over to you, Mr. Madani. I don't know if you can hear us. Maybe you need to unmute your microphone if you want to come in. Okay, I don't see the contribution coming, so I suggest we then move on to my colleague Leah, who will just point a couple of questions. Come in. Okay, come in now, please. Come in now. Yes, we can hear you.
I would like to thank ILO for inviting us. Labor in the agricultural sector. Sorry, we cannot hear him well. We really apologize. His microphone is not clear at all. He's saying that there was a Syrian law to organize work between different agricultural parties, and all employers or all workers were invited to take part in this security fund, and this law is implemented on all workers in the agricultural sector. So I'd like to note that working in the agricultural sector and all what is related, such as breeding and so on, and packaging agricultural products have been subject to the law of managing agricultural relations, and it included all those working in the agri-food sector. That's all. I don't want to talk or to intervene any longer.
Many thanks for this, Mr. Madani, for this good practice from Syria of having an inclusive law that provides access to social security to all workers in the agriculture sector. So with this, we thank all who have made contributions, and give Leah the floor to point maybe to the team and just a couple of questions we got in the chat, and we'll go to the closing. Over to you, Leah.
Thank you, Luca.
There are three main questions. One question was about the papers and how much they include social protection and social security, and the difference between the two. Those papers are only about social security, and the social protection is only financed by contributions. This is just a quick question that I wanted to answer. There are two other questions. I will ask one question or give one question to Luca to take care of, and another to Nurjella. So the first question, any of you can answer that. I will read it in English because it was asked in English.
Is there any observed linkage between the social insurance schemes and migration of workers? This question would be for Luca, and then I'll ask another question for Lucas or Nurjella about possible social insurance solutions that can address the specific vulnerabilities and risks that women face in the sector during reproductive age, maternity, childcare, etc. And a third question also about to what extent do we have solutions for the coverage of seasonal workers? I know the papers did address that issue, but also I refer this to the IPCIG team. So to you, Luca, on the question for migration. Thank you.
Presume you mean Lucas or Luca?
Luca.
Luca. Okay.
Yes.
Well, I think I mentioned that I think it has come clear throughout the session that the fact that in agriculture we tend to see overrepresentation of migrant workers as opposed to national workers in a number of countries in the region. And that, as we know, social security systems are in some countries more hard to access for migrant workers for matters to do both with legal barriers, but also with administrative barriers. So that's definitely a group that require particular focus from the perspective of ensuring participation of agricultural workers in rural areas and in the agriculture sector, by recognizing the specific needs, but also by recognizing the need to better integrate social security systems in countries where migrant workers operate, but also with social security system in countries of origin, from where those migrant agricultural workers come and to where most likely they will return. And so this opens a whole additional range of challenges that perhaps we can bring to a discussion at another time, but really about how to better link social security systems across countries of origin and destination to ensure that workers not only contribute, but also will benefit in old age to the contributions they've made during their working life. At the moment, in most countries, migrant workers, including in agriculture, when they are eligible to social security, they only receive a lump sum. And that is insufficient when we look at standards that require or that recommend countries to provide regular pensions that better protect needs of workers for a longer period of time. I will leave it at that. And maybe just to mention, we will take, colleagues, just 5 more minutes to wrap up and close this session.
Thank you, Luca. Nurjella or Lucas, would you like to answer the 2 questions on, you know, to what extent social insurance solutions target or cater for the risks that women face during reproductive age and in the sector, as well as the question on the to what extent can seasonal workers be covered in social insurance? Thank you, Lucas.
Thank you, Leah. So we know that women in the agricultural sector face many risks, and social insurance schemes such as maternity benefits, maternity and parental leaves are fundamental to protect women during the reproductive age. And the main finding in this sense is that in many MENA countries, maternity benefits are not offered as a social insurance benefit. And that's a social insurance benefit that encompasses the co-responsibility to contribute between employers and the employees, but as employer liability schemes. And the literature shows that the lack of compliance with benefits offered as employer liability is a common issue. Employer liability schemes also can create perverse incentives for hiring women, and employer liability also offers a limited level of compensation, rarely cover risks associated with long-term compensations, and undermines the principle of solidarity of social insurance schemes, of social protection. Also, in our studies, we noticed that administrative barriers also particularly concerning for rural women, mainly transportation barriers to go to cities and register in social insurance schemes. And we also have an example of good practice for this barrier. In Tunisia, a mobile application called Amini that Nurjella mentioned was developed to facilitate integration of female agricultural workers into the government social insurance scheme. And through the platform, rural women can enroll and pay their contributions without leaving their homes and their workplaces and spending time and money traveling. And with Amini, it is estimated that over 500,000 rural women will be able to access social security and healthcare. Thank you, Leah.
Thank you very much. So I think we are coming, colleagues, to a closing of this session. Is 4 p.m. sharp here in Lebanon. I want to thank all of you who have participated until now. We still have about 60 people online. At some point, we reached 100. I think is a testimony to the relevance of this debate, to the importance of this topic across the region. I just want to quickly summarize some of the issues that we've covered and discussed. Clearly, the importance of extending social insurance to agricultural workers, the need to design social insurance schemes which are better fit to the needs of agricultural workers, and finding a good balance finding a good balance between a focus on long-term risks, but also providing protection for risks that are immediately covered during the working life for the workers and their families, particularly when it comes to health insurance. We've also heard and spoke about the need to innovate, thinking about how to finance social insurance for agricultural workers in a way that strengthens solidarity between agricultural workers and other workers, and also with a better mix of social contributions and taxes as financial sources. So recognizing the need that social insurance is only one part of a social protection system, and those social protection floors that recommendation 202 calls for are a key ingredient for any solution to this problem. But also to allow flexibility to adapt social insurance contribution rates to workers' contributory capacity, and also to the agriculture business model, which is quite peculiar, is different to most of other business models. And it also varies a lot even within the agriculture sector. And finally, we have heard about the need to enhance administration of social insurance systems to reduce barriers, to simplify access, improve inspection, and also better integrate government systems and coordination, including between the Ministry of Agriculture, Labor, and Social Protection, for example, by linking licensing in the sector with participation in social insurance, but also by using better new technology for outreach, for registration, for management of contributions, to have better, more penetration in a sector which remains perhaps amongst the less visible, the harder to reach sectors in the economy. We've heard loud and clear the need to improve representation, to give voice to agriculture workers through participation in organizations, trade unions, and also the need to make this sector more visible by enhancing information on who are agriculture workers, access to identification, information systems. Finally, to improve and invest in information campaigns to enhance literacy about social insurance, to enhance knowledge and understanding of the benefits of social insurance and why is it important for agriculture workers and their families to participate in those, recognizing as well the role of the employers in ensuring compliance with the social security systems where it's applicable. Finally, we have heard about the need to embed this agenda on extension of social insurance within a broader context of enhancing working conditions for agriculture workers. So the inclusion in the labor law, enhancing mechanisms for labor protection, including wage protection, increasing occupational safety and health standards and mechanisms to enforce those standards, and improve labor relations in the agriculture sector by providing better options for agriculture workers to organize and act collectively. With this in mind, I really want to thank the broad team that made this webinar possible, starting by the IPC-IG team in all the different facets of it, the socialprotection.org team, and of course FAO and ILO teams, who I think have shown to you the importance of collaborating across the UN, come to as one UN at points where our mandates intersect and overlap to make progress. What can we commit to you before we finish this session? I think we can commit to 3 actions. First, we will share the final papers, which will incorporate inputs received throughout the session, and also inputs received in writing to all of you who have participated in the webinar, so that you can use them in your engagement at country level as required. Second, we will be available, FAO and ILO, to work with you on this topic in your country. So if you feel that the paper inspires you, gives you a motivation, or creates space for engagement on this topic at country level, reach out to the FAO, reach out to the ILO, and we will be happily to work on you with you jointly on this matter. And third, we will continue to think about how to structure this conversation at regional level. I think it has been clear to all of us that the region has advanced. This is a difficult problem. It's a big challenge, but there has been progress in a number of countries, and we can gain a lot by working together, by sharing solutions, good practices across ministries of labor and agriculture, as well as with workers and employers organizations across the region. And we hope to continue to organize this regional process with the IPC-IG in the years to come. I couldn't finish without thanking the three excellent discussants for their contributions and inputs. So thanks very much to the three of them, Mr. Bisharat, Ms. Sabrine, and Ms. Yaouni, for your very insightful inputs to the conversation. And I would say until the next one, this is a start of the process. Please reach out to us if you want to discuss this more, and please keep, stay tuned as the reports will reach you soon in your inbox. And hopefully this is going to be an opportunity for us to make progress on this important agenda for ensuring decent work and access to social security to all agricultural workers in the MENA region. Have a good evening all, have a good weekend ahead, and all the best. Bye-bye.